And we are. So I just wanted to welcome everybody to this special council public planning meeting. And we're pleased to advise you that this meeting is being live streamed and will be audio and video recorded and shall form part of the record, which will be retained according to the town's retention bylaw. And for more information about the collection, please contact the clerk's office. And just a reminder, if you're not, to all the speakers tonight, if you could please remember to mute your audio when you're not speaking. The town also recently adopted our land acknowledgement statement and acknowledges that the town of Innisfil is situated on treaty land that is steeped in rich Indigenous history. We also acknowledge that this land is the traditional territories of the First Peoples of Turtle Island. It is shared between the Anishinaabe peoples of Beausoleil First Nation, Chippewas of Rama First Nation, and Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation, and we thank them for their generous stewardship. This meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people, and as settlers, we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. The town acknowledges the forced sacrifices that are the foundation of Canadian society today. We are dedicated to honoring Indigenous history and culture and are committed to moving forward in the spirit of reconciliation and respect with all First Nation, Métis, and Inuit peoples. So I'd first like to ask for a mover and a seconder to adopt the agenda for tonight's meeting. That's moved by Councillor Arsati and seconded by Councillor Fowler. All those in favor? That is carried. Next, I would ask if there's any disclosures of interest. Seeing none, if any become apparent to you, please let us know at that time. So tonight we have two items on the agenda for information and public consultation purposes, and no decisions are being made at tonight's meeting. We'll start by hearing from Hempson Consulting Incorporated regarding the Town of Innisfil's 2021 Development Charges Amendment Study as required by the Development Charges Act. Council may have a few questions or provide comment, and then we will have an opportunity for public consultation where members of the public who have pre-registered will be identified on the speakers list. And when it's your turn, I will ask you to turn on your video and your audio, and you'll have 5 minutes to ask questions or express your comments or concerns. Then staff or the consultant will respond where possible. If your questions can't be answered this evening, they will be addressed in a staff report that will come back to council. Once everyone has had an opportunity, should anyone need to speak for a second time to identify an issue that has not already been raised or to receive clarification, they may be provided an additional 5 minutes. Should any member of the public watching the live stream wish to make a comment during the meeting, they can email or call Clerk's Services, where the Deputy Clerk will be monitoring for input and will provide your comments to Council and town staff during the meeting. You can see the email address and the phone number up on the screen. Any comments received will become part of the public record. If you do not submit your comments during this meeting, you can still send in comments and correspondence, and they will be provided to Council and town staff. You will also be added to the circulation list as an interested party, where you will be kept updated on any further information regarding this item. The email and phone number, again, is listed on the PowerPoint during the meeting and is also available on tonight's agenda that can be found on the town's website. So we will now hear from the town clerk on how public notice of this meeting was provided. Mr. Parkin, good evening.
Good evening, Your Worship and Council. Notice for this public meeting was circulated in the newspaper on September 30th, 2021, and on the town's website.
Thank you. Has any correspondence been received by Clerk Services concerning the proposed amendments?
Your Worship, no correspondence has been received by the clerk's office regarding this item. However, members of the public may still provide comment or register their interest regarding the application or regarding these proposed amendments during the meeting or up until council makes a decision by contacting the clerk's office.
Thank you, Mr. Parkin. We'll now hear from Julia Shiraki from Hemson Consulting Incorporated, who will provide a high-level summary of the proposed amendments. Whenever you're ready, Ms. Shiraki.
Great, thanks very much and happy to be here tonight. I have quite a brief presentation today. This is quite a simple and scope DC amendment study. So just getting into the next slide, please. So now this is a statutory public meeting required through the Development Charges Act. Now the primary purpose is really just to provide the public with an opportunity to make representation on the proposed 2021 DC Amendment Background Study and Bylaw. The DC Amendment Background Study was made publicly available on September 24th of this year and is available on the city's the town's website, sorry. And the draft bylaw as well was made publicly available on October 6th. Now just moving on. So just a little bit of context on the next slide. We at Hemson previously assisted the town with its 2018 DC background study. So that was just a couple of years ago, but since that time, there have been some key changes to the Development Charges Act. And really the primary purpose of this amendment study is to adapt one of those key changes to the legislation. So previously, a 10% discount was required for certain soft services. So what that means effectively is that the town could only fund up to a maximum of 90% of the growth-related capital costs through DCs. And so the services impacted by this legislation in Innisfil were just listed on the slide here. So library, parks and recreation, municipal fleet, and general government. And so really these are the only services covered by this DC amendment. The rest of the town's DCs, so when we're looking at things like water, wastewater, roads, police, fire, etc., those will remain in force through the currently enforced bylaw. And then the only real other change here is that we have adjusted the planning period where we previously in the 2018 DC study had a 10-year planning period of 2018 to 2027. We've now just simply truncated that to a 7-year planning period from 2021 to 2027. So just adjusting to account for the years that have passed since then, but keeping that horizon year of 2027. And then just moving on. So this just gives an overall summary of our typical DC study process. So we start off with a development forecast. So we're required to forecast the amount, type, and location of development over that planning horizon. We then work with staff to determine growth-related capital needs. So a key component of that sort of work that ties into that is this evaluation of historic service levels. So we look at a 10-year historical period. We establish an average historical service level by service area. And for the soft services, that establishes essentially a ceiling or a funding envelope on the amount that can be funded from DC. So that was a key component that was updated through this process. And then that kind of feeds back into the capital program work and establishes that ceiling, and the remainder of the cost must be funded through other sources or through future DC updates. We also make a series of other deductions from the capital program. We account for any grants, any other contributions such as direct developer contributions, any benefit to existing or replacement shares. We account for available DC reserves, as well as what we call post-period benefit. So that's anything that would benefit development occurring after that 2027 period. And that leaves us with our costs eligible for DC recovery, which we allocate to the residential sector and translate into a per unit charge. and the non-residential sector, which is translated into a per square meter of GFA charge. So all of those elements listed here, the development forecast, the service level calculation, the capital programs, and the rate calculations are all available in the background study that is available on the town's website. And now just moving on to the next slide. Just a really brief summary of our development forecast that was used for the purposes of the amendment. And I just want to highlight that really we've made no changes from the 2018 DC study. We still are using the most recent census data is still 2016. We did evaluate with staff the building permits and recent data and determined that no change would be needed. Really, again, it's just that truncating the planning period from 2021 to 2027. So now we're just looking at a 7-year planning period. And so you can see here during that 7-year planning period, we're looking at growth of about 4,400 dwellings, about 11,000 people when we're talking about census population, which is net of census undercount, which is about 3 or 4%, I believe. Population in new dwellings is just over 12,000, so that's typically over than that net census population. Employment growth, close to 1,800 jobs, and that's tied to about 102,000 square meters of non-residential building space. So this really forms the denominator of that DC calculation for those services. And then just moving on to the next slide, please. So now we'll just get a little bit into the capital programs that we've prepared for the DC amendment study. So in preparing the capital programs, we've worked closely with city staff, or sorry, town staff. Sorry about that, with regards to each of those 4 service areas. Our key data sources here were the current capital plans as well. And like I mentioned, we go through that adjustment of the DC eligible costs to account for any grants, benefit to existing replacement elements, available DC reserve funds, and those post 2027 shares. And just a quick note there, the post 2027 shares are both based on funding envelope restrictions, as well as other benefiting horizon considerations. So if we have a study, say, that will is viewed to benefit development beyond that 2027 time horizon, we attribute a share to that, which is deducted from the DC study. And then on the next slide, we just have a rundown of those capital costs. So like I said, we've aligned these with the current budget kind of as much as possible and updated costs from the 2018 DC study, but really not a lot of changes from the 2018 DC study. We've kept things pretty consistent. And then so when we're looking at our 4 services, we're looking at after grants and subsidies, we're looking at a net municipal cost of about 109 million. And then after making those deductions, we're left with about $57 million in total DC eligible costs. And then just moving on to the next slide, I'll just get right into our rate calculations. So the rates presented here on the left, I just want to note that this includes all applicable townwide services. We haven't looked in the area specific engineered services, as that would be a little bit complex to show here, but just in terms of our townwide services, we're looking at a rate of just over $38,000 per single or semi-detached unit. That rate decreases for the other unit types just based on average occupancy rates, down to just over $17,000 for a small apartment. And you can see on our pie chart on the right, I've tried to sort of highlight the 4 services in question in red. The others, like I said, are just being carried forward from the current bylaw. And so you can see that our the services that we've reviewed add up to, I would say, just under 40% of the town-wide DC. And once again, I just want to highlight that that doesn't include the water wastewater charges as well. And then on the next slide, we have our non-residential rate, which is calculated at $117.82 per square meter. Again, that includes all applicable townwide services. You'll notice here that Parks and Recreation and Library are not included. The town does not levy those services on non-residential growth. The idea there is that they are really driven by population growth rather than employment growth. And so they're not included in that non-res calculation. And then on the next slide, we'll just get into a little bit of a comparison against the current rates. So essentially, the increases for all of the services that we've reviewed are listed here. They essentially add up to an increase of $1,502 over the current rates per single detached unit. So in terms of percentages, that translates into, well, when we're looking at the 4 services only, we're looking at about a 10% increase, which is in line with that, that 10% legislated discount that we've removed. And overall, we're looking at about a 4% increase over the current rates. And then on the next slide, we have a similar comparison with the current non-residential DCs. And in this case, we're looking at an increase of about $1.03 per square meter. And this actually just represents a 1% increase overall. Again, that's really due to the library and Parks and Recreation charges not being charged to the non-residential. And so we really just have those kind of minor municipal fleet and general government charges making that bit of a difference there. And then on the next slide, just summarizing our next steps in terms of the study and wrapping things up. So we are in this consultation phase, so we are receiving and responding to any comments. We'll take those back and make any revisions to the background study or the amending DC bylaw as appropriate. Bylaw passage is targeted for November 24th of this year. And we're proposing that the rates come into force on December 1st. So that really concludes my presentation. I'm really happy to take any questions, and thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Are there any questions from members of council? Councillor Van Berkel.
Thank you, Your Worship. I notice it's not in here, but I'm just wondering, because the hospital is coming on, how the development charges will be calculated for the hospital if it comes on over the next year or the year after. Whether is that per room, per bed, per square meter? You know, I'd like to, just something that I was wondering about.
Thank you. I don't think hospitals
and I have a follow-up
DC.
question too. Please.
Okay. I don't think hospitals are DC eligible, but I'll ask Julia to answer that.
Yes, through the chair, I think I would have to check back to the town's current bylaw to verify that. But that is, you're right, it is a really common exemption. If hospitals are not exempt, then it would be charged on that per square meter basis.
Thank you. Yeah, the other thing is, because the big thing today is affordable housing, which I understand, and the government's pushing that as well as municipalities and everybody else. And development charges are not paid by developers; they are basically paid by homeowners, and usually they're incorporated into the mortgage. And I just wonder, do they pay the GST on the development charges as well? And if they do, why? I'm sorry, the HST.
Julia?
Sure, through the chair, there wouldn't be any HST on development charges, so the rate is the rate as specified. I think there would be some disagreement on whether the costs are passed on to the end user or accounted for within the land value. But I mean, you're right, affordable housing is definitely a big consideration here. This study doesn't really get into those policy issues in a lot of details. It's a really scoped amendment. I know that the town is planning on undertaking the more fulsome, comprehensive update over the next couple of years. So that could be raised at that point as well.
Some follow-up, Your Worship, because I was reading Municipal World a couple of times and development charges came up, and that was one of the big concerns in these, in these papers from Municipal World and the lectures, was that taxes are being, put on to the mortgage carrier. It's all incorporated and they are paying taxes on it according to the Municipal World. And, I read it fairly often, so I don't have any doubt to doubt them. So I was just wondering, if we are, why the government is doing that. Like that should be paid by the developer, basically. Development charges, as part of the cost of the house. And it is incorporated in the mortgage. Usually people get a mortgage. So, whatever the cost of that house is, I'm sure those development charges are in there. I don't think the developer picks them up like it used to be before development charges, where you could bargain with them. Development charges gave them an opportunity, basically to charge it on.
Thank you. Ms. Webb, did you have a comment?
Yes, through you, Your Worship, to Council Van Berkel. I think the piece about HST, so the development charges are a cost to the developer in building those units. And so I guess you could say there's HST on it in that, it forms the cost for the developer. And the developer, of course, then collects their costs plus profit on the sale of the home. So maybe you could look at it that way, that there's HST on it. But because it's there's HST on that sale, there's really no provisions in the HST, Act to exempt that, or because they're just looking at the revenue piece. They're not looking at the costs, the components of the costs that form that the developer incurs, I guess, in building that home.
I think it's sort of, double dipping a little bit, putting it on the consumers rather than the developer. Anyway, thank you. I just want to clarify that.
Thank you, Councillor. Good questions. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship, I was looking at the numbers. So a townhouse rate was around 33,000. Apartment is 17,226. And this ties in with what Councillor Van Berkel was talking about. We have quite a housing shortage in Ontario and throughout Canada at this time. This apartment DC charge of 17,000. Is there a way where the province and the municipality and the county could reduce this amount of DC charges to make it more affordable for the developer to build apartments, which are really the best thing we can do to help the housing shortage for low income? Have we ever considered that possibility of reaching out to the county and to the province and say, hey, we'd love to build more apartments for affordable housing. However, the DC charge is quite a rate still, 17,000 for a one bedroom or a bachelor. Have we thought of that to sort of see what we can do for attainable and affordable housing?
So maybe I'll just start off. So, I mean, certainly the rates that we calculate and present in our background study are what we would call full cost recovery rates. That doesn't mean that those are the rates that need to make their way into the DC bylaw. Again, I would highlight that this is a scoped amendment that only relates to a few services, and it's not opening up the town's entire bylaw. But yes, certainly if that was council's objective, these rates could be lowered below the full cost recovery that we calculated.
Follow up, Your Worship.
I'm going to ask Ms. Webb if she can add to that, and then I'll go back to you, Deputy.
Thank you.
Yes, through you, Your Worship, to Deputy Mayor Davidson. I mean, I need to confirm this, but when we are giving certain types of development, in essence, a break on their development charges, I believe there will be a requirement on the town to fund that portion from our general tax levy. And so, and that's something that we can do and we can consider. But I believe that is the process for subsidizing, I guess, DC rates for a particular type of development.
Thank you. Some municipalities have a CIP or community improvement program that funds the development or waives the fees or pays the fees of development charges for affordable housing. And I believe that's one of the county in their affordable housing mandate and strategy. I think that is part of one of the things that they do.
I'm aware of that at the county level, the CIP, but I'm wondering if it's time we take a look, I think through Your Worship with AMO, we look to find a way where municipalities can reduce that development charge on apartments and for affordable, attainable housing. I know the federal government's saying there's huge subsidies for affordable housing coming down the road. We all know how that works. But I think it's time we talk with the developers and federal governments, provincial governments, county, to really find a way of reducing these DC charges and not making the everyday taxpayer, I know there's only one taxpayer, but the municipal taxpayer is paying for it, because it is a real problem in Innisfil. We do not have social housing in Innisfil or really attainable housing in Innisfil. We're growing fast, but we're not taking care of the needs of all the people. So maybe this is time that we see this tonight, and maybe we start looking to see what we can do collectively through all the levels of government to do an improvement now before it's too late. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So as Ms. Trekkie has said, this is a very scoped amendment to get rid of that 10% discount on the soft services. But if you wanted to bring something forward, through a notice of motion or perhaps through your work with the Simcoe County Housing Corporation, absolutely, that would be a good opportunity to do that. Other questions or comments? Councillor Eisses.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think this is probably the first time this council's had a chance to look at development charges, at least that I can remember. My question was with regards to the non-residential development charges. So we as a town are trying to expand our employment lands, and I'm just wondering if there has been any studies on what our neighbors are paying or charging their non-residential employment taxpayers, just to get a feel for where we are. Businesses have the opportunity to start wherever the best fit is, and I know that the development charges is a big factor in that decision. So just wondering if we have a feel for what our neighbors or other towns have for that cost.
Ms. Webb?
Through Your Worship. First of all, I'd like to call on Julia. I'm not sure if she could make a comment in terms of how this compares to other municipalities. I mean, they work with many different municipalities.
Thank you. Yes, of course. Julia?
Yeah, so we haven't done that comparison as part of this study. It is something that we typically provide as part of our sort of broader townwide studies. I know that we did undertake that kind of analysis last time around. I believe Innisfil, fell kind of well within the comparators kind of nearby. I mean, certainly Barrie is kind of up there. And I think others in Simcoe County as well. We can provide that kind of analysis if that's something that you're looking for.
Perhaps how we could share that information is to go back and grab the PowerPoint from when we adopted the original DC bylaw, because that had the comparators for both residential and non-residential, and in that more fulsome, and time is a bit blurry which terms we did everything in, so I'm not sure when that was, but Ms. Webb, I'm sure you'd still be able to find that deck and forward it to everyone.
Yes, yes, I certainly can do that. And you're correct. I mean, at the time that we undertook the full study in 2018, or that 2018 study, I mean, those are definitely things that we would have looked at and considered in the process. And so, that's something that I can most certainly forward to council. And, it's important to note as well that, moving into the next update, I mean, again, we'll follow that process. And those are things that we're very mindful of and things that we'll discuss with council at that time.
Councillor Eisses.
Yeah, follow up.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I think that would be good to have that information. Like I say, I don't recall dealing with it in this term, but I could be mistaken. Like the mayor said, things kind of blur together a little bit. My other question was, again, with the employment lands. The charges are structured in a way that, any building permit or any project that an employer undertakes are subject to those charges, and that we have such a diverse employment land. I'm thinking about Innisfil Heights. There's retail in there. There's manufacturing. There's warehousing, and so we have this one size fits all charge, and it's really a struggle for some businesses who all they want to do is put up some outside storage to park some of their equipment in. It doesn't necessarily add any more jobs, but they're hit with this charge that is a lot of times it's more than the actual building is worth. So I'm just wondering if there is a way that the town can maybe consider some of those situations and not have a one size fits all, just to reflect the the diversity of businesses that we have in Innisfil and in the employment lands.
Ms. Webb?
Through you, your worship, to Councillor Eisses. This is something that we could, because this is just a scoped amendment, so we're not looking to, delve into that at this point in time, but it is certainly something, as we go to update the next bylaw and development charge background study, we can certainly look into that. The bylaw, and I don't know all these pieces off the top of my head, but, there's provisions in there, potentially for, when DCs are applicable. So, not in every particular case when a business does something, potentially is it attracting development charges. Now, maybe it does in most cases, but there's some exceptions to that. But it's certainly something that we'll look into for the next update.
Just final
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, when do we think that next study, a more in-depth study on this will occur?
So our plan is and that we're going to start that process at the beginning of 2022. So we'll be beginning the process with an RFP. At that point, we're going to be looking into updating our background study. We're also going to be looking to develop a CBC, so a community benefit charges study. So that's something new through the new DC legislation. So we're going to be looking to do that and updating our cash in lieu of parkland policy. So a lot of work to happen. We're going to start that at the beginning of 2022 by issuing the RFP with hopes to have council approval by June of we're starting at January 2022 with approval, looking for council approval by June of 2023. Our current bylaw expires in September of 2023.
Thank you. So just to go ahead, Ms. Webb.
I just wanted to follow up on a question that I think it was Councilor Van Berkel had earlier on the hospitals. So I can confirm that in our current DC bylaw, it does exempt buildings or structures used as hospitals governed by the Public Hospitals Act. So I don't think that it will attract DCs.
Thank you. So the update will be a fulsome. So we did the fulsome update, I guess, to your point, Councillor, we did the fulsome update in 2018 before this council was here, because they're 5-year term, like they're 5 years. So, and then this is a tweak to amend it as per the legislation, and then we'll do another fulsome one starting in 2022, as Ms. Webb said, because there are so many changes now to the DC Act. But I just wanted to point out that I remember when the 10% discount was brought in for soft services, and ever since then, municipalities have been advocating to have it, to not have it, and so it's really great to see this this change. And I know that Hemson and you, Ms. Chernecki, must be really busy with doing lots and lots and lots of these for many municipalities right now. My question, and again, this goes to the more fulsome review and not to this tweak, but it's always eluded me how a service like police services, that are one of our biggest budget items, you know, $11-12 million, are only attract 2% of the revenue for development charges. And of course, you know, when the police service, when we hear from the police services board and they say why they need to, you know, more people, more boots on the ground, it's because we have a more population and we have growth, and yet we're not able to, not very much of what the police do is DC eligible. Is that fair statement?
So I guess it's a bit of a tricky question, because I think you might be thinking about more so operating costs, which are not DC eligible. So police services are DC eligible, but you know, that comes into play where we have a major new facility, a facility expansion, major fleet expansion, equipment for officers, and things like that. So if it's just a staffing increase, then that, you know, might not translate into a large proportion of the charge.
Yeah, according to the chief, there's an issue. We don't have the cars, because the cars turn over so quickly. A police car doesn't have a very long shelf life, that it doesn't get captured because they turn them over fairly quickly. That's how I understand it.
Yeah, that's right. So it's the DC Act has a requirement that any fleet that's included in the DC capital programs has to have a useful life of 7 years or more. So police cars don't fit into that. So that's that kind of gap that you're speaking to.
Thank you very much for that. Any other questions, comments on this? Councillor Orsatti?
Thank you. For Ms. Webb, with the process with the DC in 2022, I think you said approval June of 2023. So will that give an opportunity for items to be more clearly defined in the process by them? I'm thinking of the Parks and Rec Master Plan or impact on services because of the orbit. Will we have, is that enough time to have that information, or what happens if those come into play after you've done that approval in that time, 2023?
Ms. Webb?
Through you, your worship, to Councillor Orsatti. So, you know, we are making our best efforts to, you know, have our various master plans updated. I don't know the timing of all those off the top of my head, but we certainly have a master tracker of all those items and are endeavoring to get them updated where possible. But yeah, you know, there is going to be situations potentially where, you know, just the timing of when a master plan is updated falls, you know, perhaps after our update. So that doesn't prevent us. I mean, and, you know, the master plans can be tweaked, or, you know, the numbers that fall out of those master plans can be tweaked as their input into the development charges background study. Certainly we use the master plans to guide us and so that we understand, you know, what kind of projects we want to include in the development charges study. And so perhaps if those items aren't there, you know, that it's a later update before it does get included. One thing to keep in mind as well is that, you know, many times we are exceeding our funding envelope for things like parks and recreation. And so not most of the time, we can't even collect all the development charges that we need to because our capital programs are so large. And so those things are happening in future background studies anyhow. So for the most part, we're maxing out on the allowable amount that we can collect from development charges. And so I don't think there's a risk that we're not collecting as much as we need to. We're maxing out in most cases.
Okay. Follow-up, Councillor?
Thank you. And then I agree with Councillor Van Berkel, you know, the importance of affordable housing, and certainly an interesting perspective to look at whether DCs would be waivable for affordable housing. But it was just recently in a council meeting that we looked at reducing the interest rates on affordable housing projects, you know, to, I think it was 0, and we're going to check with the county. So I think it's like, you know, we all want affordable housing, we want to attract it, but we can't have everything at I guess it has to balance out somewhere, but I think it's good to all the different avenues, look at which one makes sense and which one can we do to attract those developments that are certainly necessary. Thank you. Oh, one question. When I was reading the report, I think it was the Cookstown Theatre was ineligible under development charges. That was on page 62 in the report under Town Hall. I certainly understand that. And Cookstown Theatre ineligible under DCA. Maybe you could just.
Ms. Truckee?
Yep. So through the mayor, cultural facilities like theaters are actually specifically ineligible for funding through DCs under the DC Act. And so we really just include those in the inventory, so our service level inventories, just to kind of clarify that point, because I think the question was kind of raised in the past. So I think we had them in there and just had the cost at 0, so it wasn't tying in to the calculations.
Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you very much. That raises another question. If it is that theaters are ineligible, if in future building or in addition to a place was added that was a multi-use theater and used as something else as well, maybe, I don't know, gymnasium or something. I'm thinking multi-use because we try to get smarter with how things are built. Would that be still ineligible or only a portion of it?
Yep, so we would take that eligible portion. So if there was a rec facility portion, we would bring that portion in to the DC study.
All right, any more questions from anyone? So I want to thank you so much, Ms. Truckee. I know you came here just expecting a tiny little tweak, and we kind of got into the broader DC conversation, and really appreciate your time in doing that. I also think that, you know, look forward to a discussion surrounding the development charges. The big takeaway is you can't let it expire. You can't, you're a hard stop on the date that your bylaw expires. You have to have a new one in place. And the other thing to keep in mind too is if you, and Councillor Van Berkel will remember this, there was a time when instead of full cost recovery, we allowed developers to convince us that if we charged full cost recovery, that nobody would move here. And we discounted our development charges to attract growth. And of course, then when it comes to building the park, and there's not enough money in the DC Parks account for the park, it's because you didn't collect full cost recovery. And we've always we've always had the philosophy that growth should pay for growth, and the way to do that is full cost recovery. So seeing no other questions or comments, I will go back to my script. Typically at this point, we would hear from the public. However, we did not have any pre-registered speakers for the public consultation portion of this meeting. I'll now ask the clerk if any person has emailed or phoned in their comments during this meeting.
Thank you, Worship. Nothing received during this item.
Thank you. So now we will go to the recommendation, and can I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Van Berkel and Deputy Mayor Davidson, all those in, or any other questions or further comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? That is carried. Thank you to everyone who's taken the time to watch this live stream meeting and presentation regarding the proposed amendments. The amendments to the town's development charges bylaw will be considered by council on November the 24th, 2021. Anyone who wishes to provide comment may still do so and may also register as an interested party to be contacted before this bylaw is considered by council. Please contact the clerk's office at clerks@innisfil.ca. Council thanks everyone for their participation. We will now take a short recess to get us to 7 o'clock to start our next public meeting. So I'd ask for a mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Nicol, Councillor Orsatti, all those in favor? That is carried. Thanks everyone, and we'll see you back in 10 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, and welcome to part 2 of our evening. This portion of the meeting is Our Growth Public Workshop. So thank you. We'll now move into that part of the meeting. And this workshop is in regards to Town's Our Growth to 2051 as part of the County of Simcoe's Municipal Comprehensive Review. As with the first meeting, we will hear from a representative from SGL Planning and Design, and after they have spoken, Council may have a few questions or provide comment, and then we will have the public consultation. Members of the public who have pre-registered will be identified on the speakers list, and when it is your turn, I will ask you to turn on your video and audio, and you will have 5 minutes to ask your questions or express your comments and concerns. And because we have such a long speakers list tonight, I would respectfully ask everyone to please stick to the 5 minutes. The deputy clerk will be timing us tonight, so when you see her turn her video on, I'd ask for you to wrap up, and please don't make me interrupt you because I hate doing that. You will have time to second chance opportunity after everybody has had one chance. Town staff will respond where possible to any of your questions, and should staff not have an answer this evening, it will be addressed in a subsequent staff report. Should any member of the public watching the live stream wish to make comment during the meeting, they can email or call Clerk Services, where the deputy clerk will be monitoring for input and will provide your comments to council and town staff during the meeting. Any comments received will become part of the public record. If you do not submit your comments during this meeting, you can still send comments and they will be provided to council and town staff. You will also be added to the circulation list as an interested party, where you will be kept updated on any future information regarding this item. The email and the phone number will be listed on the PowerPoint during the meeting and is also available on tonight's agenda that can be found on the town's website. We will now hear from the town clerk on how the notice of this meeting was provided to the public. Mr. Parkin.
Thank you, Your Worship. While this is not a formal public meeting under the Planning Act for this item, notice of the public meeting was provided in the Municipal Journal on September 30th and October 14th, 2021, as well as posted on the town's website and on the town's getinvolved.ca website for commenting and review. As well, notice was sent via email to interested parties.
Thank you, Mr. Parkin. Has any correspondence been received by Clerk Services concerning the proposed amendments?
Yes, Your Worship, we have received 4 pieces of correspondence in writing to the clerk's office. I'll quickly summarize them here. The first from Patricia Robertson Mills, dated October 15th, requesting that property owned by their family on the 10th line be included on the expansion of the urban settlement area of Innisfil. Second item is from Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition, dated October 15th, 2021, stating various points regarding current land assessment needs, not following the housing mix, challenges to accommodate estimated population numbers, encroaching on existing Greenbelt or Oak Ridges moraine boundaries, and the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan. The third item is from Boosefields Inc., dated October 19th, 2021, requesting the inclusion of 7665, 7667, and 7750 Yonge Street in the Municipal Comprehensive Review. And the fourth item from Megan Varga, dated October 20th, stating that consideration be given to protect Lake Simcoe forests, wetlands, and farmlands within Innisfil. And Your Worship, members of the public may provide further comment or register their interest regarding this item during the meeting or up until council makes a decision on the matter by contacting the clerk's office.
Thank you, Mr. Parkin. We'll now hear from Paul Lowe's, Principal, SGL Planning and Design, Inc., who will provide summary of the planning context of the Municipal Comprehensive Review. Welcome, Mr. Lowe's. I still remember it as Sorensen Gravely with Lowe's, not SGL.
It was too much of a mouthful. We had to shorten it.
Whenever you're ready, sir.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, members of council. A pleasure to be before you tonight. I just wanted to indicate that we have been assisting the town for almost 2 decades in your planning, including your latest Our Place official plan, and staff asked us if we could assist them in reviewing and inputting into the county's municipal comprehensive review process. So the purpose of tonight is really just to give you an overview of that process that the county is preparing and highlight some criteria and things that we need to consider moving forward as we work through the municipal comprehensive review process and the county finishes their official plan. So next slide, please. So just to give you an overview of the county's municipal comprehensive review, the county's official comprehensive review or official plan update is required by the province, and the province is requiring all the upper tier municipalities to complete the comprehensive review process by July of 2022. And the county is required to provide for and accommodate a certain amount of growth. And that growth is set out in the province's growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. And it's set out in what's called Schedule 3, which is basically a table. And for the county of Simcoe, it sets out a population forecast of 555,000 and employment of 198,000. And you can see in the graph at the side of the table on the right-hand side, what that means in terms of increased growth till 2051, and the MCR is till a period of 2051. So we see a growth of about 198,000 people, additional people by 2051, and employment of about 81,000 growth of jobs. And to accommodate this, what the county is undertaking is a growth management exercise, which includes what's called a land needs assessment. And the land needs assessment is basically to identify how much land is required to accommodate this increase of population and employment. And there's certain provincial guidelines that require to be met to determine that land need. Following when the county finishes their official plan review process and their municipal comprehensive review in July of next year, then the municipality, Innisfil, has a year in which it has to update its official plan. So Innisfil has until July of 2023 to update its official plan in line with the county's official plan. Next slide, please. So the county has set out a 3-phase process, and you can see where we are in the middle. The first phase was data gathering and analysis, had a number of kickoff meetings, initiation of a number of technical studies. Phase 2 is really the bulk of the background analysis, and they're just at the end of phase 2. And they've completed a number of technical reports, which were released a couple of weeks ago. That includes a natural heritage system update, an agricultural system update, climate change strategy, and watershed management strategy. And I'll talk a little bit near the end of this presentation just on the natural heritage and agricultural system updates that we're looking at. One of the bigger things that they've also released, which was a little before that, was a draft and final, the draft land needs assessment. And then they will be releasing a final land needs assessment, but they've released the draft land needs assessment. I want to talk a little bit about that tonight. Moving forward then, starting in November, we'll see that final land needs assessment. They'll finalize the other technical reports. They'll prepare a draft official plan, and then moving into next year, a final official plan and adoption by next July. Next slide, please. Just focusing a little bit on the land needs assessment. The county set out 2 steps, and this is important because one of the steps is pushing it over to the local municipalities to finalize their input. So the first step is the county will take that overall 555,000 people and the corresponding amount of jobs, and then they have to allocate that population, they have to allocate the employment, and they have to determine what that means in terms of housing need, and they allocate that to each of the municipalities. And they've come up with a draft allocation to the town of Innisfil. And they also have, as part of that, they have to set out what the updated intensification target is. So intensification target is how much growth, how much of that population and housing growth has to be accommodated within a defined area called the build-up area. The build-up area is Alcona and Cookstown. That's the province is determining that, and it's the areas that were built upon in 2006. And a certain percentage of the growth has to go into those areas, which is primarily Alcona. And also they set out outside of that build-up area, it's called the designated greenfield area, they set a minimum density target. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that later on. And then the land needs assessment is also determining the amount of new land that is required. So expansion of the existing urban areas, expansion of the existing settlement areas for both residential and employment purposes. So once the county's done that and the draft is finished, then they're throwing it over to the local municipalities, to Innisfil and others, to determine where that amount of growth should go. So we have to look at that and input to the county where we think the new urban area lands should go based on criteria that I'm going to discuss. And that's really the point of tonight's presentation and the input from the public, is to hear from the public of our growth, where the growth should go. Next slide, please. So I jumped ahead of myself. So the purpose of the workshop is to update public and council on the MCR process, which I've done a bit, and I'll continue on that. And then obtain public input on identifying where the growth should go and where the growth shouldn't go, where we should sustain existing areas. Also get a comments on our growth, what should be our growth strategy, and any comments on the county's preliminary land needs. Next slide, please. I've obviously been in too many meetings today, and my voice is getting a little hoarse, so I apologize. When we think about where the growth should go, there's really some important aspects we need to think about, and there's some strategic areas for growth in the municipality, and these are set out in various official plan documents, provincial documents, county documents. And first of all, we need to look at Alcona, because the growth plan, following through with the county official plan and the Innisfil's official plan, directed a significant portion of all growth has to go to primary settlement areas. And Alcona is Innisfil's primary settlement area. There's only one primary settlement area in Innisfil, and that's Alcona. And there's a number of others across the county, but a significant amount of growth is to be allocated to those settlement areas. As well, our place, your official plan, prioritizes future urban growth in both Alcona North, which is up to the 9th line, and Alcona South, including around the future GO station, down to the 6th line and south of the 6th line. Related to that also is the Orbit major transit station area, where the municipality wants to allocate a fair amount of growth. And it's been identified as this is a strategic growth area in support of future transit, support of creating a transit supportive community. And it's intended that major residential employment growth at transit supportive densities occur in that area. Next slide, please. Two other strategic areas for growth, and the first one is certainly just as important as the other two, is where does employment go? And Innisfil Heights has been identified by the province as a strategic settlement employment area, and that's where really the majority of traditional employment lands, we can call that, as well as supporting employment lands go. So these are your most significant employment area, but employment will also happen throughout your community as well, particularly around in Orbit, around the major transit station area, around the GO station. Moving down probably in priority is your other settlement areas. And there's the urban settlement areas and the more smaller hamlets. In the urban settlement areas, there may be a need for accommodating growth in those. There may be some rounding out growth in the existing planned area. And those are their service settlements that can accommodate growth. And that's Cookstown, Lefroy, Stroud, and Sandy Cove are your more urban settlements. Smaller settlement areas, the smaller ones, Guildford, those settlement areas, basically there's limited growth to happen there. They're unserviced settlement areas. So there's still a little bit, but it's fairly limited. Next slide, please. So I just want to talk a little bit about the intensification target that's set out in the land needs assessment and how that's being changed. So as I indicated, in the intensification target applies to the built up area, the lands within the built boundary, and that's shown for Alcona in the gray as the build up area or the delineated built boundary. And that's where all the intensification target should go. Also, we have Cookstown as well that has a fair amount of built up area, but because of servicing constraints in Cookstown, we're going to see lesser growth go there. So really the opportunity accommodating intensification is in Alcona, and really it's along Innisfil Beach Road in the downtown. What's notable, because this was delineated back in 2006 by the province, what's notable is that the major transit station area around Orbit is not part of the build-up area, nor are the other downtowns and built areas that we find in Lefroy, Sandy Cove, or Stroud. And that's just because the province never delineated those as build-up areas. So although the growth would happen in downtown in Lefroy or in Stroud or Sandy Cove, and we encourage that, it doesn't count towards intensification. So the current target in the current county official plan and the town's Our Place official plan is 33%. The land needs assessment by the county proposes to increase that to 35%. That's 35% of all growth between 2021 and 2051. So it's a bigger pie. So although the target's just going up 2%, it's a fair amount of growth because it's of that larger pie. Bradford West Gwillimbury and New Tecumseh they both have a primary settlement area, and they have a slightly higher intensification target of 45%. But they also have larger communities, a larger extensive downtown, and larger ability to accommodate that intensification than does Alcona. And as I said, intensification doesn't count in the other settlement areas. And the land needs assessment has forecasted that taking into account already designated lands, applications, accessory, a factor for accessory units, even with those, an additional 5,400 units will need to be accommodated primarily in Alcona as intensification. So it's a significant amount of growth that we need to look at and try and accommodate primarily in downtown Alcona. Next slide, please. This is the opposite, of course, of the build-up areas I mentioned earlier was the designated greenfield area. The designated greenfield areas you see on this map is the yellow areas in Alcona, the yellow areas in Cookstown, and also are the entire areas of your service settlement area. So this is Lefroy Belle-York, Sandy Cove, and Stroud, which is planned to be fully serviced in the future. So it is identified as part of that. Churchill, Fennells Corners, Guildford don't count towards the designated greenfield area density target. They're more considered as rural settlement areas, hamlets essentially, unserviced areas. So your current designated greenfield area density target is 32 residents and jobs per hectare. The land needs assessment by the county is proposing to increase that to 55 residents and jobs per hectare, and that's more reasonable for what you want to try and achieve in Innisfil in terms of the density you want to achieve around Orbit, and the density that you're seeing in new subdivisions in Alcona and Lefroy and Sandy Cove. And it's in line with the amount that's set out for the other primary settlement areas in the county at 55. And in the county, although the growth plan sets out a minimum target for Simcoe of 50 persons and jobs per hectare, the county's staff report is encouraging higher density targets. So that's why you're seeing in a number of the municipalities of 55 residents and jobs per hectare. And any new expansion that is proposed will also have to meet this target as well as existing lands. Next slide, please. So I just want to talk a little bit more about some of the numbers in the draft land needs assessment by the county. The draft or preliminary land needs assessment allocates a 2051 population for Innisfil of 84,570 people. That's a growth of approximately 40,000 people between 2021 and 2051. And that, when you translate that into housing units, it's approximately 18,000 units that we need to still accommodate. Now, some of those, remember that some of those were going to go into the build-up area, some of those would go into the greenfield areas. The county has identified a existing supply of 8,300 units, and I'm going to say that just the county has identified that. We're looking at with your staff right now to confirm whether that number is accurate or not. We have some concerns on some of the numbers, but we're going to be working with the county over the next little while to confirm whether that's accurate. So that's the supply that they've identified to date. And then based on that existing supply, they subtract that from the growth of units to determine how much more land needs there are. So they've determined that after taking into account your supply, which is the supply would be registered plans, your draft approved plans, your applications for new apartment buildings, and vacant designated lands. After taking into that supply, there's still a need for another 5,400 units in your build-up area through intensification, and approximately 5,000 units in the designated greenfield area. So that gets to where you need a settlement expansion. Basically, they're saying you need a settlement expansion to accommodate a further 5,000 units. In the rural area, which is Churchill, Fennells, Cords, and Guildford, they're identifying a surplus of lands in the rural area, so there's no need. They've allocated some amount of population to the rural areas, a limited amount. They're identifying no need for any settlement expansion in those areas. Again, we're double checking the numbers to confirm whether that's correct. And the employment, they've also looked at the employment land needs for Innisfil Heights, and they've also identified a surplus of employment lands. And again, we're checking on that as you see in the last bullet. Next slide, please. So there's been a number of requests for settlement expansion. If you take that, I said 5,000 units, the draft LNA identifies a land need for urban expansion of about 170 hectares. And that's based on the market demand methodology and the land needs assessment established by the province. Now, the county has received a number of requests, as has the town, and we've passed those on to the county. They received 25 settlement area boundary expansion requests in the town of Innisfil, and they represent almost 1,400 hectares. So you see there's a fair discrepancy between the requests and what the current land needs assessment is identifying to be allocated. So there's a task to be done to review all these requests to see which ones are appropriate. And that 1,400 hectares does include the area of the orbit MZO. And we can't forget that out of that population requirement, we also have to accommodate intensification in Alcona, primarily Alcona. As the last bullet point says, that the requests considerably exceed the identified land need, and something we'll have to consider. Next slide, please. I do want to just highlight where these requests are. I'm just going to quickly go through the maps. There's 3 maps of Innisfil showing the requests. The requests are in the purple dark lines on the map. And you'll see there's a fair amount around Alcona, north of Lefroy, around Sandy Cove, and around Stroud, and some just scattered ones in the rural area. Next slide, please. This is around Churchill, sorry. One's very small one, another farm on the southeast corner. Next slide, please. I think this should be Cookstown. Yes, and one adjacent to Cookstown and 2 in the rural area. So you see there's a lot of requests, some right far from urban areas, some adjacent to urban areas. Next slide, please. So how are we going to look at these requests, and how are we going to determine and make recommendations to yourselves about what's appropriate? Well, we're going to develop a series of criteria, and we'll be presenting that criteria to council and as we evaluate these requests. Some of the criteria that we're looking at, considering the official plan and considering the community strategic plan, are that significant growth should be allocated to Alcona North and South, as the fish plan calls for, including the future Orbit major transit station area. We should ensure that the expansion creates local jobs, and particularly in Isabel Heights, but also downtown Alcona, Orbit, and other areas, and that the job employment growth balances with the residential growth. That any expansion should be contiguous to existing settlement area boundaries, which is also a provincial policy direction, and provide an appropriate rural interface. That any expansion should have the potential to achieve a compact, walkable, sustainable, and healthy community that enhances a sense of place, which is the key element of our place official plan. That any expansion supports a concurrent town master planning updates that are being undertaken, and that a range of housing types for all people of all ages and stages is provided for. So these are ones that we've come up with working with staff, and we'll be finalizing those, but there's additional ones that are required based on the growth plan. If we could look at the next slide, please. Thank you. So the growth plan sets out criteria that we have to meet as well for any settlement expansion. And the county will be looking at these criteria when they make their final decision, of course. And these include that there's going to be sufficient existing or planned infrastructure, and it's available and financially viable for that infrastructure. That any expansion is informed by water, wastewater, and stormwater master plans. That any expansion avoids negative impacts on the environmental system, including the province's natural heritage system. That any expansion avoids prime agriculture areas where possible. And the policies require us to look at where if it's in a prime agricultural area, are there reasonable alternatives available and evaluated? And if so, we need to select the lower priority agricultural lands where possible. And we need to ensure compliance with a minimum distance separation formula. The minimum distance separation formula basically looks at livestock operations and ensures that there's a proper separation distance to existing livestock operations. It's also a requirement for no expansion to specialty crop areas, which are basically the marshlands in Innisfil, and avoids adverse impacts on the agri-food network. And lastly, any expansion needs to meet applicable provincial policies, such as the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan. Next slide, please. So I said I was just going to talk briefly, and I'm just going to cover two of the technical reports very quickly, because we're looking at those, and then I'll finish up with next steps. So as we said, the county is doing, looking at a natural heritage review based on the province's natural heritage system. And the provincial growth plan introduced a new concept, a natural heritage system for the greater Golden Horseshoe. It's shown in the map here on the right, and it's right across the greater Golden Horseshoe. And the province allows for refinements of that mapping through the county MCR process. And that's the only way you can refine it. It's through the county MCR process. And it's an overlay on the official plan. Now there's other natural heritage features. Our natural heritage system in Innisfil is set out in our place. In some areas is more extensive. This is focusing, the province is really focusing on the big areas, the big core areas and the big linkages. There'll be scattered woodlands, wetlands all through the white area if you look at our place, but these are the big linkages. So right now the county is looking at where refinements are necessary, and we're also looking at that and inputting into the county's process on that. And some of the criteria include minor technical adjustments where there's mapping discrepancies and based on map skills. Remember, this is done at a very large scale across the greater Golden Horseshoe. There may be addition of natural features that are contiguous to this green area that should be part of that provincial NHS. There may be areas that should be removed, such as along the waterfront where there is existing subdivisions, but they've been caught because they're wooded areas, and there's a number of those. Where there's already subdivisions identified, where there's roads that cut cut up a natural heritage system. So we'll be looking at those. Removal of small isolated portions of NHS, provided there are no natural features. And so the county's been looking at that. And so those are some of the criteria, and there's a discussion paper that the county has out that it describes these. You can find that on the county website. It's very helpful. But we'll be looking in more detail on these. And any proposed refinements that the county does, they have to accompany that with supporting documentation. Next slide, please. Similar to the natural heritage system, the province also released an agricultural system for the Greater Golden Horseshoe as part of the growth plan. And again, the province allows refinements, but only through the county's MCR process. And again, they have a series of criteria for that. And you can see the orange area identifies the province's agricultural system. And then there's a lot of darker brown areas you can see in some areas, and those are optional areas that could be added if the county so chooses. But the province doesn't require, but the province does require the county to look at them to decide whether those areas should be added as well. And then there's criteria for revising them, including looking at identified boundaries, minor technical adjustments, where there's more precise local information, where there's natural heritage features in which agriculture uses are not ongoing, some of the edge mapping around agriculture areas, and lands that have already been designated for settlement areas. So again, those refinements have to be accompanied by thorough documentation. And we've got the agricultural consultant that was previously retained to do our place is assisting staff in reviewing this work. So next and final slide, please. So just wanted to cover off the next steps in the county process. On November 9th, the county MCR project will be before County Council for an update. Public input on the land needs assessment and the four draft technical reports that they've released, including the LNA, are due by November 12th. The town, thankfully, has a little bit more time. We have to provide our comments on the draft LNA by December 3rd. And then in January, the county's first draft official plan will be released, official plan amendment or official plan. In January 14th was when the town's comments on the other four technical reports and mapping refinements are due. And then from February to July, they'll be giving public input on the draft official plan, and a final county official plan amendment will be released. And then between 2022 and July 2023, the town's official plan amendments will have to be prepared and adopted to implement the county's MCR and the county's new official plan. So that's a lot of material. Hopefully you're able to follow. Lots of material on the county's website, and certainly we'll have it as well as we work through over the next number of months and providing input and reporting back to council on that input. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lowe's. You do have a way of making it very understandable, even though it was a lot of information, because I don't speak planner. So I thank you very much for putting it into layman's terms for us and sharing all that information. So I'll go to council now for questions and comments. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Worship. I appreciate receiving the report. It's actually quite interesting on which direction Innisfil goes in the future. You spoke of new land development in Algona to the north and south. We've got Sandy Cove to the north there, but we seem to have a gap. When I looked on your map, there seems to be a gap between being in the settlement area and not being in the settlement area. And I can see that settlement expansion that we're talking about, connecting Sandy Cove to Algona and that space in between, because we've got the 20th Side Road, Lockhart, 25th, servicing is in that area and could easily service that area. So I see that as an expansion area for the future. When we're looking at expansion and increasing the settlement expansion area, things that we need to look at are sort of something that's been brought to my attention is health wellness, education wellness, economical wellness, physical and community wellness, that we integrate into these areas to create something unique for Innisfil. And I know the development industry, when you see where they want to have all these growths, that's not conducive to the town for looking at future transit systems or putting our infrastructure to its best use. And we've got to look at infrastructure being extremely integrated into our new development areas. And a lot of technical infrastructure needs to be considered now and sort of put into that plan. I've had a couple of developers already try to reach out to me. I'm not returning calls, but I think the message needs to be clear that the developers need to meet our vision of development, to meet our objectives in order to create new jobs within this settlement area, an expansion of the settlement area. We need to create jobs there so people aren't traveling or commuting all the time outside of it. We have to figure something. And the next thing that caught my attention is when you spoke about agriculture. One thing that we're missing in this film, I do see little pockets of it popping up, is agritourism that seems to be popping up now. And when you see that huge yellow agricultural area that you showed, that's a humongous area. There it is in Simcoe County that we're not tapping into, that we can create jobs and tourist dollars in that particular area. So I think our council has our hands full and staff have to let the development industry know, okay, we may expand, we have to intensify, but we're going to do it what we see best for our town and best for our community, considering the integrated policies. So that's just my point on what I've seen tonight. I really appreciate it because it did answer some questions I'd made notes on. So I thank you for that.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Other questions or comments from members of council? Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Your Worship. When we're talking about the build-up area and Simcoe County designating it as such, we're talking about a great deal of intensification. Now, does the county set in standard the minimum requirements for this intensification, or is it passed on to the town and the planning department to see how it plays out? Because I want to see if they have a specific requirement, like are we talking high intensification, medium density? Are we talking mixed use, for example, like they have in Vaughan, where they have the bottom two rows, which are offices, and then the apartment buildings on top of that? Is there anything specifically required, or is it just the minimum standard set, and then the town takes it from there?
Mr. Lowe's.
Certainly, through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Fowler. Great question. The county, all they're setting is the number. Now they have policies in their official plan. Well, they may have additional policies in the official plan to help guide it. But you also have policies in your official plan for downtown Okona that set out very well through our place what the vision was for growth. So there is opportunity to accommodate mixed use growth, and it calls for in the center, not closer to lake. Closer to lake is a lower height, but within the rest of the downtown, west of 25th, I think it is. I believe it was up to 8 stories, but intended to be mixed use as well with ground related commercial uses. So that's the vision. We don't know whether we can accommodate all of that growth in that area. Something we'll have to relook at. But that we've already got the policy set up to provide for that. We'll just have to relook at the new numbers. Hope that helps answer your question.
Oh, by all means, follow up, Your Worship.
Go ahead.
Okay, the reason I'm asking this, I just want to be clear, is that the Deputy Mayor stated that, we're a commuter town. So if we can create jobs locally where people can actually walk to it, that was something that would benefit us as a whole. That's why that came forward. And when it comes to my particular ward, I know the subdivisions that are being built and why they're being planned the way they are by the people that own them. So it's something that we have to be aware of as a whole. And I know council is very much aware of the limited green space and everything that we do. So we're trying to make conscious decisions that will have lasting effects. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Other questions and comments from council? Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Your Mayor. A question I have is considering is the new hospital which is going in. I've noticed that the area around Yonge and Innisfil Beach Road I guess it's a relatively small dot, and so there's nothing mentioned on the map at all about that general area. Is this an opportunity to designate those lands institutional during this process, or is that something that has to happen separately?
Mr. Lowe's?
Certainly, through you, Madam Mayor, to Councillor Waters. The institutional designation will happen in the town's official plan. not at the county's official plan. There, it's fairly high level at the county's official plan. They identify settlement areas. Your campus, as we call it, is not a settlement area, but we have in the official plan, the county's recognized in your official plan that that's a campus for institutional recreation public uses, and the hospital is a great location there to expand on that. So that will be addressed in the town's official plan, not at the county's official plan.
Thank you, Mr. Lowe's. Deputy Mayor Davidson.
Thank you, Worship. In response to what Councillor Alex Waters brought up, it's an interesting point. If we design, like, it's not in our official plan as a settlement area. Institutional is good, but I'm looking at 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years from now, that would be a key area where we may want to have a settlement area for seniors residents, or a retirement village, or something very close to the hospital, close to the resort, or close to the rec center. And I'm not saying 10 years, I'm saying 20, 30 years from now, when the hospital is actually up and running, you'd want to have your vulnerable people closer to it and with easy access, less transportation. So I think when Councillor Waters brought that up, it just tinged in my head that we really need to look at that campus concept. Is it okay for now, but is it okay down the road? You know, and that's where we may have to expand our settlement area, as we talked in the Greenfields, into that particular area. So I just want that point brought forward. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. But I think, Mr. Lowe's, retirement homes or long-term care homes are still an institutional use, are they not?
That's correct, Madam Chair. Madam Mayor. We certainly have that opinion. provided the county continues to agree with us.
Other questions? Councillor Nicol.
Thank you, Worship. Obviously, I don't need an answer tonight. Obviously, we're just receiving this, but as it was identified, the county said that we are about 5,500 units short or deficient, and the orbit itself is not included in this report. Realistically, could the orbit not easily accommodate the intensification we require, the targets, as well as the shortages we have, without impacting our natural heritage or the agricultural area, and without growth into limited service areas as suggested by some of the developers? You know, looking at some of the stuff for the Cookstown area and wherever else, I know that limited servicing there, it just seems like we need to have the orbit included in this study to ideally accommodate almost all of the intensification and the deficient numbers we have for units. Just a thought. Thank you.
Mr. Lowe's, do you have a comment on that?
Certainly, Madam Mayor. Orbit is definitely able to accommodate the designated greenfield area, although it's not part. This is the problem. It's not part of the build-up area or the built boundary. You would think it would be, because we're trying to accommodate fairly dense development as part of the orbit. But based on the provincial definition and the mapping of the province, it's not part of the build-up area, so it can't accommodate the intensification amount, but it can accommodate the designated greenfield area amount.
Thank you. Other questions and comments? I had one, Mr. Lowe's, and it's really just about the terminology of expansion, settlement area expansion. So what, in my mind, expanding means taking something and making it bigger, but some of these applications they're not an expansion, they're just standalone settlement area. And how does that fit into the definition of expansion?
Certainly, Madam Mayor, I'll try to address that. One thing we have to realize that these are wishes by individual landowners, developers, and they may not meet your criteria or any provincial criteria. So one thing about the province, they do not allow any identification of any new settlement areas. So, and they also very specifically say any expansion has to be to an existing boundary. So it has to be immediately adjacent to an existing settlement area. So the maps you see with some scattered requests in the middle of the rural area obviously they will not meet our criteria and we will not be able to select those.
Thank you for that. One final call, Donna, Councillor Sadi, sorry.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just looking at the Stroud area, which is not in this, but I'm just wondering with the city of Barrie developing on former Innisfil land, which was agricultural, and moving to our northern border, how does that change the province from looking at areas like that? Does it change when you're going to have large development on, former agricultural land and a lot of housing? So how does that change to the land that we have near it that is agricultural, and yet we don't have the servicing there?
Mr. Laws?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I think I'll try and address it. I'm not quite sure what Councillor Asadi is asking about, but let me try and see if it works. See if that addresses your question. In terms of Stroud, there's a number of requests adjacent to it, and you're right. There's going to be services, municipal services right up to Stroud. The master service plan and the fish plan calls for Stroud to be serviced in the future. So we have to figure out a way to get services there. Does it come through Barrie? Does it come elsewhere through Innisfil? I think that the objective is to bring it through Innisfil, not rely on Barrie, but to service that area, which would allow Stroud to grow. And there's a couple of requests adjacent to Stroud. So that's the long-term vision. And it's kind of, I think what you're saying, it's kind of strange to have urban services happening right against the Stroud when we can't grow it yet until we have full services, which is a constraint. But we're recognizing, the county's recognizing Stroud as an urban settlement area, so it's intended for growth in the future. Does that help answer your question?
That is, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you. I did have one more I wanted to ask. I'm sorry I've forgotten about it. On page 14 of your slide presentation, you had a map of settlement area boundary expansions. So the one at the top of the map there, that's in ESSA, is it not? I don't think that's an Innisfil.
Can't tell. 27, I'm not sure. It might be because these are maps. Sorry, Madam Chair, Madam Mayor. These are maps from the county. So the Innisfil boundary, it may be. I think the one to the west of Cookstown is in New Tech. Is it not?
No.
Is that in Innisfil or is that in ESSA?
Yeah. So the top one is in ESSA. It's south of 5 Side Road and it's west of 27. But the big one, I think, on the north side of Highway 89, that could also be ESSA.
Is it? Yeah. Okay. It could be because these maps are provided by the county and they don't differentiate between settlement, between municipal boundaries.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Anyone else? Seeing none, we'll move on then, and we'll now hear from those members of the public who have questions regarding the proposed amendment before council votes on receiving the report and all comments provided during this meeting. The speaking order is now on the screen. When it's your turn, please 5 minutes to express your questions or concerns, and town staff will be capturing your comments as we progress. And also remember that written comments written submissions are more than welcome as well. So once your 5 minutes are up, please turn your video and audio off and I'll call on the next speaker. Once all of the speakers on the list have had an opportunity, I will ask for any additional speakers. And at that time, please turn on your camera and give me a wave and I'll call on you. I will, during the meeting, once you've provided comment, you're more than welcome to remain in the meeting, but please turn off your audio and video. We may also leave the meeting, and you can also leave the meeting and watch it on YouTube if that's more comfortable for you. I'll now ask the first person on the list, Mark Jacobs, to please turn on your video and audio and state your full name for the record. Mr. Jacobs, whenever you're ready.
Hi, good evening, Madam Mayor. This is Mark Jacobs from the Big Larry Group.
Welcome.
Hi. Hi, I'm Mark Jacobs from the Big Larry Group. I'm here speaking on behalf of Del Ray Developments, who are the owners of 6225 Yonge Street. The property is located at the southeast corner of Yonge Street and Killarney Beach Road in the hamlet of Churchill. To begin, I just wanted to say thank you to the town's planning staff who have been helpful throughout the process since the County of Simcoe initiated their municipal comprehensive review. And also want to say thank you to Paul Lowe's for his presentation this evening. I'm speaking tonight with respect to a settlement area boundary expansion request submitted to the County of Simcoe by the Big Larry Group on behalf of the owners. This has been identified as ISABEQ-2105 on slide 13 of Mr. Lowe's presentation. The request was made for consideration to expand the existing settlement area boundary that currently cuts through a portion of the property. The property is approximately 40 hectares in size and contains agricultural lands, agricultural buildings, and natural heritage features, including a watercourse that flows through the property along the eastern boundary and then turns west through the property. South of the watercourse, the lands consist of floodplains, wetlands, and woodland features, which would be deemed environmentally protected. These natural heritage features and associated protective buffers account for approximately 18.3 hectares of the property, which is almost half the size of the entire property. The northwest portion of the property, which is approximately 6.9 hectares in size, is currently within the existing Churchill settlement area boundary. The remaining 14.8 hectares make up our expansion request. This area fills in or rounds out the settlement area boundary between the existing boundary and the natural heritage and environmentally protected lands. So while the entire 40 hectares is included in the 1,400 hectares of land associated with settlement area boundary expansion requests that were provided by the county, what we are requesting is about a third of the total area of the property. Our request was supplemented with supporting studies, including a natural environment assessment that reviewed the limits of the developable area, as well as a functional servicing and stormwater management report that identified how development of the property can be serviced with water, sanitary, and stormwater infrastructure. Properties in the hamlet of Churchill are currently serviced by municipal water and private septic systems. However, municipal sanitary infrastructure has been identified in the town's 2018 master servicing plan to connect Churchill to the Lakeshore wastewater treatment plant in Lefroy. This obviously can be updated in the future. While sanitary infrastructure is not currently planned for Churchill before the year 2031, the county and the town are planning for the growth to be to the year 2051. And as such, the timing of any municipal infrastructure, including a sanitary sewer, can be reevaluated. Lastly, the Big Larry Group included a conceptual development plan for the property, which had proposed urban residential and commercial land uses. The urban residential densities are in line with the minimum densities for designated greenfield areas, and also based on the assumption that full municipal service will be available, and that would be through the extension of the sanitary sewer on Killarney Beach Road. It's understood that growth will be directed towards primary settlement areas. However, we feel there are opportunities for growth to round out some of the town's other settlement areas, and we'll be happy to continue these discussions with town staff as well as SGL. That concludes my comments for this evening. Thank you again for all the efforts thus far on the town's Planning Our Growth initiative. I look forward to continuing the conversation in the near future.
Thank you, Mr. Jacobs, for your presentation, and thank you for being respectful for the time limits. I'll next call on Claire Malcolmson.
Hi.
Good evening.
I'm going to try my hardest to be 5 minutes. Can I share a presentation? Oh, there it is. Thank you so much. Thank you, Paul, and all members of council and the public for all the information here today. My name is Claire Malcolmson. I'm the executive director of the Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition. I'm also a landowner in Innisfil. We represent the Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition. It represents 28 groups all around the Lake Simcoe watershed who care about the lake's health. Next slide, please. I want to talk a little about the context that we're talking about. So this growth plan exercise applies to the Greater Golden Horseshoe. You can see how little natural heritage is left in the Greater Golden Horseshoe area. And I wanted to take a couple minutes to just point out, like, you can see the large forest at Big Bay Point. You can see the large forest at Degrassi Point. We need to protect these natural heritage features for all of Ontario, really, not just for Lake Simcoe and not just for Innisfil. Next slide. What I'm really wanting to focus on is the need to identify what areas we need to protect first. You can't get it back once it's gone. And as we all know, wetland replacement does not work as well as original wetlands. We're facing a climate crisis. We need to protect wetlands and forests for their intrinsic value, but also for our own protection for life on Earth in the future, and for dealing with the impacts of climate change. So we have multiple different natural heritage systems here on this map. I do want to point out that here, I don't know if you can see my pointer, but with the orbit, the town of Innisfil has wiped out a really significant portion of the natural heritage feature identified by the province. This mapping has been available since 2018. So I'd like Innisfil to really start paying attention to protecting natural heritage. Also, the map on the right is one that our organization had put together with some professional cartographers. The dark green is what is actually well protected by provincial policy. So we're going to go to the next slide, because I want to make the point that Innisfil really needs to work first on identifying and protecting the natural heritage that we have. So when you compare the wetland and woodland cover in Innisfil and the Innisfil Creeks sub-watershed, part of the Lake Simcoe watershed, we only have 10% and 28% wetland and woodland. The targets are 20% and 40%. So we have a long way to go. Long story short, you can go to the next slide, please. We absolutely cannot lose any natural heritage through this exercise. And I can say that on behalf of a lot of people that are despairing that we are losing it, and Innisfil has work to do there. Next slide, please. So I want to just reaffirm those points. No new development at all in wetlands and forests of any size. Deputy Mayor Davidson, I think, is recommending that we develop here. The natural heritage system produced by the LSRCA identifies that that is natural heritage area and important for restoration. So please, let's not do that. We really want to stress that the comments about the orbit, it was just a year ago today that it came to the public. It was rushed through in about a week. And the promise was that there would be lots of intensification and that we would not need to develop everywhere and we would not become Mississauga North, right? So let's make sure that that happens through this process. Next slide, please. So the housing mix, I have spent quite a lot of time looking at Hemson's land needs assessment for Innisfil. It doesn't really make sense to me. One, because the orbit is not included. I mean, I just can't buy that. A year ago, we were told that we were going to build up and intensify and it was going to be wonderful. We're going into orbit. But now we're told that the orbit is not part of this process. I really think, given the process that council went through and the lack of public support for the orbit and the MZO, it is really incumbent on council to make sure that the orbit is included in this exercise. If we get the orbit and the 40,000 roughly plus people, that is far more than what the lake can handle. It's far more than what the province has allocated. So the semi-single row apartment split, I would really like an explanation from somebody about how that does or does not conform to the province's mandated greenfield allocations that I've laid out there as well. Next slide, please. The land needs assessment, really, it's an opportunity to look at affordability and intensification in greater detail. So as noted by many other people, we do have a housing affordability issue all across Simcoe County. So there's a need for more smaller homes. You can also identify intensification through the use of the town's revised bylaw that allows building of secondary suites right? Those can be counted towards your intensification goals. They don't all have to be apartments. I think that scares people off because we don't have apartments in Innisfil. So think about intensification that actually works with the built form in the town right now. It of course also lowers environmental impacts because you don't have to use up as much land. We need higher intensification also to allow for public transit, which Innisfil does not have. And of course, if people can take transit, it reduces the need for each member of the family above 16 to have a car, which is often what you see in Innisfil. There's some specific suggestions there. Next slide. I think the intensification targets could be higher. I like, oh no, go ahead, next slide. I like the criteria on this slide. I do think that it's just really important that it is followed. I think if it was followed, we wouldn't be looking at the orbit at all, which was in environmental areas, prime agricultural or agricultural areas, and where there is no town and the only infrastructure is the train track. Next slide.
How many more do you have, Claire?
That's it. This is my last one.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So summary of advice, protect natural heritage, please. There's lots of promises that need to be kept here, especially around the delivery of the orbit. Again, in line with the promises made to the around the orbit, plan to grow up, not out, use the intensification opportunities that you have that help support the middle class of people who own homes and could build a secondary suite and just have someone else in their house. I understand also that the county has said that it's the municipalities that identify the affordability issues and address infrastructure, wastewater, transit issues. I haven't seen anything about that, and I do expect that the town will actually undertake those components of the LNA. And if you won't, I'd like to hear why or why not. And then finally, just that, the Lake Simcoe still is getting double the amount of phosphorus plus that it should be getting every year. Development absolutely contributes to this. So let's actually protect Lake Simcoe by not even using any more new farmland if possible through this process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Malcolmson. And the next speaker is Peter Madalena, please. Welcome, Peter, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. We just have a presentation as well. Good evening, Your Worship, councilors, town staff, and members of the public. My name is Peter Madalena, and I represent the owner of the subject property, which I will be speaking to tonight. I am also here with my colleague, Ute Maya Gambatista, which will provide you with an overview of the concept for our site. If you can flip to the next slide, please. So you'll see from this slide, the subject property is located on the north side of Innisfil Beach Road, just west of 20th Side Road. The property is about 50 hectares, and you'll notice that the site is in close proximity to Alcona. As you can see, it is just outside of the settlement boundary, and we feel it offers a feasible opportunity to facilitate the orderly and natural expansion of the Alcona settlement boundary without leapfrogging over a large geographic area. If you could please flip to the next slide. So the Town of Innisfil official plan, Our Place, includes policies on placemaking, and it recognizes the fact that great places are created when planning decisions are made through the lens of placemaking. So what is placemaking? Placemaking is about connecting people in a cohesive environment. People connect in a place where they shop, they eat, they gather, and they interact. Great places are created through strong connections. So the concept of placemaking is embedded in the official plan of Innisfil, and the strategies included to create great places focus on gathering places for people with a mix of uses and activities, with a strong focus on urban designs and creating a strong sense of place. So you will see from this map that this site is located between 4 of the key placemaking destinations that are identified in the plan: downtown Alcona and Innisfil Beach Park to the east, and then you have the Civic Campus and Innisfil Heights Gateway to the west. The location of the site is just on the boundary of the Alcona settlement area and between these 4 key placemaking areas. It makes it a viable location to connect people through a cohesive social environment. Our concept will leverage on the town's vision of connection, placemaking, and creating great places. You will notice from this slide that the natural pathway of growth is on Innisfil Beach Road, providing an intuitive connection between the Civic Campus, Innisfil Heights, downtown Alcona, and Innisfil Beach Park. This will result in an orderly development pattern that leverages the town vision for these key placemaking destination. Now, not noted on this slide, but highly relevant to the future development of the site is the recent announcement by the Royal Victoria Hospital to locate its new South Campus at the southeast corner of Yonge and Innisfil Beach Road. This site is large enough to accommodate 3 phases of future expansion and is going to be an integral part of how planning will evolve on IBR, Alcona, and Innisfil overall. So from a broader perspective, the subject site will benefit from and enhance the town's key place-making destinations. It's easily accessed from Highway 400 and arterial roads. Accessibility will further be enhanced through planned laneway expansions on RBI and Yonge Street, and it will also be accessible via public transit. It is immediately adjacent to Alcona, and it is close to the Rizzardo Health and Wellness Center, the Civic Campus, and future health services such as the Royal Victoria Hospital South Campus. So at this point, I would like to turn it over to my colleague Ute, who will provide you with some of the details of our vision for the site and the concept for the site.
Thank you. Is Ute on listed as one of the speakers, or is she speaking?
She is listed as one of the speakers, yes.
Okay. And is that Deputy Clerk, is she the next speaker?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I was trying to turn on my video. Good evening. Thank you for having us, and good evening, members of council. So next slide, please. As Peter was explaining, I think the plan that we are presenting and bringing to you today really builds on all the efforts that the municipality has put together in ensuring development and growth. It's implemented in a smart and sustainable manner. So the development of the concept option is really entrenched in ensuring that it's environmentally responsible. So we are conserving, protecting, and enhancing natural features, and it's right nested within that wonderful kind of horseshoe that defines Alcona. It's intended to be accessible and connected, and that's for all means of transportation. It builds on the enormous amount of infrastructure and effort that has been put into making Innisfil Beach Road into the connecting tissue that really kind of forms the main spine of the town. It provides active living for a variety of transportation modes. It delivers a range of recreational opportunities for all ages year-round. And finally, all of these layers come together in providing and establishing a place-making strategy that's really built on pedestrian walkable neighborhoods. So all these principles are now illustrated through the next slide. So the next one, please. The concept plan, it's built on the idea of a series of villages. Obviously, each village is defined by your typical 5-minute walk circle, which is represented in this graphic. As we transition from Innisfil Beach Road into the larger property, you have a change of character and intensification and typologies that respond to the context. So along Innisfil Beach Road, we are proposing a series of mixed-use mid-rise typologies that carry the vision that has been put forward for the remainder of Innisfil Beach Road further east. It kind of provides that entrance into the larger village, and then the internal arrangement or layout is formed by 5 distinctive villages. Next slide. Each village, as part of best practices in how we design and think of communities, it has to integrate an open space center that's easily identifiable, and it's really kind of framing or providing a focus for each village. So you can see a series of circles that actually define the center of each village, and a series of pedestrian connections and links that take you from and across the site, whether there's a future, hopefully, trail along the railroad, all the way to the wonderful woodlot and stream to the west. Next slide. There was a series of ideas that we are thinking of implementing as far as an open space programming that can be accommodated in each one of these very distinctive center spaces, especially cater for an age-friendly kind of type of community. And finally, building on this series of layers, next slide, please. We have a road system that really connects the neighborhood as much as possible to Innisfil Beach Road. It allows for the potential future connection to the north, and it really kind of extends the active transportation possibilities across the neighborhood, understanding that roads are as important and as much part of the open space system as parks and other open spaces. Next slide. So finally, we have the overall master plan. We have a clear defined center with a quite distinctive mixed use proposal along Innisfil Beach Road, but more relevant to the discussion today on expansion. And as you, Madam Mayor mentioned, it's kind of making something certain size a little bit larger. And we believe that the presented master plan not only brings forward quality in design, a quality that really builds on the placemaking efforts and design directives that the town has been implementing for quite a while now, but also relates to its context. It builds on the enormous amount of infrastructure and investment that the town has put into making Innisfil Beach Road its main street. It complements the series of placemaking destinations that you have envisioned along the road, and it certainly provides a great opportunity to increase the variety of housing typologies, in this instance, more age-friendly typologies for continuously aging population in Canada and Ontario. So that concludes our presentation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ute. Next on the speakers list is Katarzyna. I'm sure I've messed up your name. I apologize. Sliwa.
Not at all. Good evening, Madam Mayor and Council and Mr. Lowe's. My name is Katarzyna Sliwa. I am a municipal planning lawyer with Dentons, and I'm here tonight on behalf of two different clients. I actually registered separately for them. So if I may, I'll start with Sugar Meadows, Inc. Sugar Meadows owns approximately 20.8 hectares of land. The lands are located at the west side of Sandy Cove of the settlement area, municipally known as 1159 to 1265 Lockhart Road. They are shown just to the left of the Sandy Cove settlement area on Mr. Lowe's slide 13, together with the lands next to them between the settlement area and the Sugar Meadows lands are adjacent lands that we've engaged with the town with respect to both parcels. The contemplated development for these lands includes a purpose-built rental for seniors, similar to other projects our client is developing and constructing in other municipalities in Ontario. The lands were proposed to be a designated rural area in the town's previous 2006 official plan, but a non-decision overlay was added to the official plan mapping to these and other lands in Innisfil in order to resolve outstanding concerns that had been raised at the time by the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. Sugar Meadows appealed the Town of Innisfil, Our Town official plan, which removed the rural area with overlay in our client's opinion prematurely. And in September 2020, SLR, which is an environmental consultant, completed an agricultural land assessment report, which concluded that the soils for the lands were class 4 and that the lands should be included with excluded from the prime agricultural areas and designated as rural. This recommendation was consistent with that rural designation assigned to the lands in the previous 2006 OP. And with other agricultural lands within the county with the same land capability ratings and designated as rural, both within the county and in Innisfil. That appeal was resolved in November of 2020 via minutes of settlement on the understanding that the county would consider these lands for rural uses and development through this municipal comprehensive review. And further that on the understanding that should the county make decisions that led to that, the town would following that update its own official plan accordingly. We simply ask tonight, Madam Mayor and Council, that the lands be considered for inclusion in the Sandy Cove settlement area through this MCR. We look forward to working with Mr. Lowe's and your staff through this process, and we're happy to answer any questions. I thank you for your time and an opportunity to speak. And I'll put my other hat on now and maybe restart the clock and speak on behalf of the other client that we're registered to speak on behalf of. And that is Innisfil Mapleview Development Limited, or IMDL. IMDL is the owner of approximately 35.3 hectares of land located in the town of Innisfil, again, outside of the Sandy Cove settlement area, and depicted on slide 13 of Mr. Lowe's presentation with the north purple boundary and the hatching. The lands are located in the southwest quadrant of Mapleview Drive and 25th Side Road. You'll hear from our client's land use planner later on, Mr. Michael Manette, about the planning overview and proposal contemplated for these lands, which includes housing for seniors, including those with dementia, Alzheimer's, and persons with disabilities, including long-term care, as well as residential and retail office and institutional uses, doctor's offices, and that sort of thing. Also, 39 acres of the lands are proposed to be donated to the Conservation Authority to maintain the existing environmental features and potential nature trails and so on. I will focus tonight a little bit mundane and boring, unfortunately, is my task, but I'm going to focus on explaining briefly how these lands have been tied up for the better part of over 2 decades in red tape and appeals. The lands are subject to outstanding appeals of both the previous 2006 Town of Innisfil official plan and the 2008 county official plan. These appeals continue to be adjourned sine die until the MCR is completed. At the core of the outstanding appeals is the 1997 county official plan, which first identified Sandy Cove as a settlement area at the county level. The delineation of the settlement area boundary was subject to a non-decision by the then Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, resulting in several non-decision appeals in December 2007. IMDL participated in these appeals. In July of 2008, a settlement was reached and the ministry lifted the non-decision overlay and approved a settlement area for Sandy Cove. In August of 2008, the Ontario Municipal Board, as it then was, which is now continued as the Ontario Land Tribunal, approved the 1997 county OP with Sandy Cove recognized as a settlement area. The 1997 OP schedules, however, were not updated to reflect the newly approved settlement area. The 2006 Innisfil OP followed. It identified a conceptual settlement area boundary for Sandy Cove, which was confirmed by a secondary plan study. The lands were included within the secondary plan area, but were not included within the conceptual settlement area boundary. IMDL was in discussions with town staff at the time, I'm advised, throughout the process, and there was a consensus that the lands would be brought within the settlement area boundary through that secondary plan study process. which would round out the settlement area boundary for Sandy Cove. That secondary plan, however, was never completed, and IMDL appealed the Sandy Cove settlement area boundary in December 2008. I should also say that in November 2008, a new county OP was adopted. The settlement area boundary for Sandy Cove mirrored the conceptual boundary in the 2006 Innisfil OP, and that 2008 county OP was again subject to a non-decision by MMH, which was appealed by several individuals, including IMDL. In March 2016, IMDL entered into a settlement and agreed to a partial withdrawal of its appeal on the basis that the lands would be substantively considered for development during the next MCR. IMDL scoped its appeal of the Sandy Cove settlement area boundary in the town and county official plans to the delineation of the boundary as it would apply to the lands. The appeals, as I mentioned earlier, were adjourned sine die until the county's MCR is completed. In February of this year, 2021, so we're back in the present, the lands were redesignated rural area and key natural heritage and key hydraulic feature area via Official Plan Amendment 3 to align the designation from the town OP with that of the county OP. IMDL had also appealed the 2018 Innisfil Official Plan, which was resolved via settlement, which included that the lands would be considered for inclusion in the Sandy Cove settlement area during this next MCR. The appeals, as I mentioned earlier, of the 2006 town OP and 2008 county OP remained adjourned at the tribunal pending the completion of the MCR. Including the lands in the Sandy Cove settlement area is a logical squaring off of the boundary, as you will hear from Mr. Manette, and the lands have direct access to municipal servicing. The inclusion of the lands within the Sandy Cove settlement area would also avoid significant and unnecessary time and expense of the hearing before the Ontario Land Tribunal, and which date back to historically and planning instruments that are decades old. We again respectfully ask that the lands be included in the settlement area for Sandy Cove through this municipal comprehensive review. And again, I thank you for your time. Those are my submissions.
Thank you, Katriana. Next, we have Jerry Martinovic.
Thank you, Your Worship. My name is Jerry Martinovich. I am the Housing Services Manager at Contact Community Services. We are the Housing Resource Center for South Simcoe, including Innisfil. And I would like to thank you, Mayor Dolan, Deputy Mayor Davidson, and council members for hearing from us and for the dedication you have shown to the issue of homelessness and poverty in the municipality of Innisfil. Speaking on behalf of Contact Community Services and the South Simcoe chapter of the Simcoe County Alliance to End Homelessness, we are very disappointed to see that the affordable housing was not only not prioritized, but not mentioned at all in your growth plan. As you are no doubt aware, Simcoe County is experiencing an affordable housing crisis, and in South Simcoe, including Innisfil, and that crisis is even more severe. The 2016 census showed that nearly 10% of Innisfil residents live below the poverty line, and for children, that rate reaches nearly 13%, with nearly 9% of residents and more than 48% of renters spending more than the recommended 30% of their income on housing. We all know that if something is not included in the growth plan, it doesn't get the attention and resources it deserves. But given that we are merely at the start of what is likely to be a very long-term affordable housing crisis in South Simcoe, it is absolutely necessary that we do everything possible, not only to address the current need, but also to anticipate the future need. Given that this growth plan is for 30 years, it is imperative that affordable housing be a major consideration of this plan. The 2021 census is being processed as we speak, and we expect the data to show the number of people who are struggling to find or maintain housing has increased. Current data shows that between 2011 and 2016, Innisfil's population grew by nearly 12%, and that rate of increase is expected to grow. If affordable housing is not incorporated in your growth plan, then as your population grows, the number of households who are underhoused will also increase and challenge the available resources in an area that is already under-resourced. Our own data already demonstrates that. In 2018, Contact assisted 2 households in Innisfil. In 2019, that increased to 7 households and then jumped to 40 households in 2020. and is already at 41 households as of September 30th of this year, which amounts to a 585% increase in assistance requests since 2019. But the truly scary part of these numbers is that more than 85% of the households from Innisfil that we're assisting aren't low income. They're working individuals and families with full-time jobs who are facing homelessness because of the increase of evictions and significant increase in housing costs. Contact Community Services, SHIFT, and the other members of SCADA South Simcoe would gladly partner with the town of Innisfil to continue this conversation so that we can address the need in your community. We strongly implore you to revisit your growth plan and include affordable housing as a priority. If you decide not to do that, we would really like to know why. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Martinovic. Really great comments. Appreciate you being here and appreciate the support we get from Contact. I agree that that we have residents who are in need, but we also, it wasn't until 2019 that we realized that Contact serviced Innisfil. We knew they serviced Bradford and New Tecumseh, but weren't sure. But luckily, your executive director reached out to us, and we were able to partner and do some good work. And so for that, we really do appreciate it. Next, we have Jonathan Sasso. Mr. Sasso, whenever you're ready.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, Council, staff, and members of the public. My name is Jonathan Sasso, and I'm a senior planner from Humphreys Planning Group. We represent a number of owners with land holdings located in the town of Innisfil. And today we're here speaking on behalf of the following landowners. Nick Cordelucci, the owner of the property located at 7387 Yonge Street. Innis Valley Holdings, Inc., the registered owner of the property located at 7429 Yonge Street. 7545 Young Holdings, Inc., the owners of the lands located at 7545 Yonge Street. And Cook's Glen Development, Inc., the registered owners of the property located at 4131 15th Line. The aforementioned lands all share similar characteristics in that they're all located outside of the settlement area boundary and are located in the countryside area on the edge of urban and village settlements. As part of the town's official plan review to bring its official plan into greater conformity with the provincial plans and policies, as well as the Simcoe County official plan, we're requesting consideration of these lands to be included in the town's Innisfil settlement areas in order to accommodate future planned growth to the year 2051. From a land use planning perspective, these lands are suitable in terms of their shape, size, and location to accommodate new urban growth and would constitute a logical and contiguous extension of existing settlement areas. A request for consideration of these lands has been submitted to the county as part of their land needs assessment and potential settlement area boundary expansion through the ongoing municipal comprehensive review. We look forward to working with both county and municipal staff as they finalize the draft technical reports and studies and identify new urban lands to accommodate the forecasted growth. That concludes my remarks for today, and I would like to thank you for your time and attention this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Sasso, much appreciated. Next is Alex Savagno. Alex, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My name is Alex Savagno. I'm with Bousfields, Inc. I'm actually here with Emma West, who is number 9, just right after me in the speaking order. And I will defer to her to make some brief remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Emma, welcome.
Good evening. Thank you very much. I'm Emma West from Bousfields, and we appreciate the opportunity to speak with you this evening. You received a letter from us, which should be in your package. So I'm going to keep my remarks brief. It's already a late-ish evening. So we're the planning consultants for the Stroud Village Developers Group, which is comprised of multiple owners with properties that are located within Stroud, but also adjacent to it. We submitted the letter that outlines more of our analysis and request, but just to say, we've been monitoring the municipal comprehensive review process on behalf of the group, and we request that Stroud be one of the areas in the county and town where growth be allocated, including expansion to its boundaries. And there's already been some discussion this evening about Stroud, and as you know, as an existing settlement area that already provides a complete and compact community that is on or near important transportation corridors and close to transit. It's also not too far from the town campus that was also discussed earlier this evening. So you can see how all of these elements make Stroud a really important place within the town and measure up against the criteria that Mr. Lowe's outlined this evening that would be used to evaluate these settlement area boundary expansions. The other thing that was discussed this evening was that services are planned for Stroud. And that's an important point because within the official plan, Stroud is currently identified as one of the village settlement areas, and the policies refer to the fact that that is the case because there are servicing constraints. So with the idea that services are planned for Stroud, and also that there was a recent improvement to a trunk sanitary sewer that was actually oversized to accommodate future growth within Stroud. Those two things combined, as well as the fact that it is already a complete and compact community that would be further supported by additional growth within the existing community, but also through expansion of the settlement area, lead us to the conclusion that it would be an excellent place for expansion, and therefore our request to you this evening and in our letter is that the Stroud Village Developers Group's lands be included in a settlement area boundary expansion and not just be identified as a minor rounding out area. I have one question as well. I just wanted to clarify with respect to the numbers in the growth plan and the fact that those are identified as minimums. We know that the town needs to work closely with the county on allocations, but we're wondering how the town is approaching the fact that those numbers are minimums and how you're working with the county on the allocation, recognizing that fact. So I thank you again for the time to speak with you this evening, and we look forward to working with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. West, and I'm sure staff have noted that, and your question will be answered in subsequent staff reports. Thank you for your time. Next is Michael Manette.
Good evening. I think I have my video going now.
Yes, you do. Welcome.
Thank you. This is a continuation of information that you heard from Ms. Sleva earlier. And is it possible to put up the plans that we submitted? I believe they should be available. If not, well, I guess I'll say good evening. And we are the planning consultant, as indicated earlier, for Mapleview Development Limited, which is the property at the southwest quadrant of Mapleview Drive and 25th Side Road. And as you heard earlier, this property is just over 35 hectares in size, and it's immediately adjacent to the Sandy Cove settlement area on its eastern and southern boundaries. The request for the settlement area boundary expansion is a natural extension that would square off the boundary of Sandy Cove. We have made our submission as well to the county through its MCR process. And we should point out that a lot of work was done subsequent to the initial consideration of having these lands included in Sandy Cove starting in 2006. So we've been at this for 15 years. Approximately in around 2014, a number of studies were carried out in support of having these lands included in the Sandy Cove area. There was a phase 1 environmental assessment carried out, and it indicated that the site has never had any buildings or structures on it. And that is a result of, and it was never a farmed area except in the early 40s, where it was just an open farm field. And that's because of the underlying sand and gravel soils that were not good for agricultural land. And there was an actual aggregate extraction that took place on those lands in the late 90s and subsequent through the early 2000s. Currently, the lands are vacant. The initial functional servicing report that was prepared by Cole Engineering in 2014 indicated that these lands were immediately adjacent to the future pumping station, which now exists, for the sanitary sewer on the 25th side road that services Big Bay Point area, and that could accommodate the sanitary flows from the IMDL lands. This report will be updated as we proceed through a development process if these lands are incorporated into the Sandy Cove community. Other studies carried out in 2014 included an environmental impact study and a traffic impact study, and these studies will also be updated as we move forward through the process. It should be pointed out that our conceptual master plan has a layout that provides for 40% of the site to be maintained as environmental protection area, which includes a small water course, which is part of the Innisfil Creek watershed. The remaining 60%, which results in about 21 hectares, would be available for development. The master plan that we have created, and we have filed this with the planning department and through Mary Nordstrom, has been submitted to incorporate a variety of land use built forms and types to create a complete community. That complete community would include a variety of housing built forms and tenures, including affordable housing, housing for a full range of ages from singles, young families to seniors, and that can include those with dementia, Alzheimer's, and persons with other disabilities, including long-term care facilities. And we've also incorporated retail, office, and institutional uses. The layout that we have is flexible, and we were, through our discussions with Mary Nordstrom, we are looking for input from planning staff to make sure that we provide the types of uses and built forms that are desired by the municipality. And so we have provided a master plan at this point, but that is somewhat flexible, and we would hope to have input from the municipality as we design the process for the lands. Currently, the master plan that we provided provides for approximately 390 units and 3 acres of non-residential development, 3.5 acres of mixed-use development. So we're trying to include a complete community. We provide the opportunity for community uses as well. And with the large proportion at the southwest quadrant of the lands being maintained for natural heritage, we also have the potential for connecting through to a natural heritage system with walking trails and biking trails. Through the Municipal Comprehensive Review, we hope that these lands will be incorporated into the Sandy Cove settlement area, and we will provide potential for these lands through phased development. However, with the existing services being immediately adjacent, including the main pumping station, it's expected that shovels could be in the ground for a first phase within 2 to 3 years. Thank you. And I was hoping that since we provided the drawings that they would be able to be put up on the screen, but I guess we can't do that because I wanted to show you what the plan looked like.
Thank you, Mr. Manette. I think maybe they were part of Katriana's presentation, and because you weren't back to back, maybe that was part of it. But all of this will come back to staff, and you're welcome to, through staff, forward any information that you'd like council to see.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time. And finally, we have Arash Fatemi. And unless he's using a different computer, I don't see that name on the screen. Okay, so Arash Fatemi is not here, so we will go then to, is there any additional speakers, anything that needs to be added? Seeing none, then I'll ask the clerk if we've had any comments or questions that have come in since we've been talking. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Your Worship. We did get one email which with some questions, and I'll just quickly summarize them here from Mr. Colin Gust. And he is asking for council to comment on the status of servicing, planning, and road widening for the employment land, specifically along Veterans Drive between Innisfil Beach Road and the town limits north of the 9th line. A few of his questions are, when is the road widening going to be completed? Has it been budget approved? Will Veterans Drive have water, sanitary, and sewer mains during or after the widening? Will the widening match the profile of Veterans Drive in Barrie, north of Salem? And he's wondering whether the owner of the Great Canadian Casino has approached the town proposing future developments or usage of the land south of the current Georgian Downs building. And that was it for emails or phone calls.
Thank you, Mr. Parkin. And I always get confused. Which one is which? Which is that? Is Veterans 5 Side Road or 10 Side Road? 5 Side Road. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, a lot of those questions I'm sure staff at the county can answer because that's a county road project that's happening right now. But we'll make sure, Mr. Guest, that we get your answers to you either through our engineering staff or through the county's engineering staff. And if that's all we've had, then I now will go to the recommendation to receive any comments provided this evening. So can I please have a mover and a seconder? I've got Councillor Fowler and Councillor Ices. Any final questions or comments from members of council? Seeing none, all in favor of the recommendation, that is carried. Thanks to everyone who's taken the time to watch this live streamed meeting. Anyone who wishes to provide further comment, they may still do so and may also register as an interested party to be contacted prior to further consideration by council. And please contact the clerk's office at clerksoffice@innisfil.ca. Important to do if you want to be notified when this staff report is going to be coming back and council will be debating further. So council wishes to thank, on behalf of all of council, I wish to thank everybody for their participation this evening and have a good rest of the evening. So the confirming bylaw, can I have a mover and a seconder to confirm our special council meeting? Councillor Payne and Councillor Orsatti, all those in favor? That is carried. And finally, our adjournment, Councillor Waters and Councillor Nickel, all those in favor? That is carried. And we're adjourned. Thanks, everyone.